Hello, my friends and Bible students. This is Tim, your fellow student. Just glad to be with you in our journey through the Bible together. Today, a reading was in Job chapter 34 to 37. I had a friend who told me about spending an afternoon with her grandson once. And Sue, I hope you'll forgive me for stealing your story, but this is just too good. Um, she said as they sat together on another couch, and she said, I pray every day that God will make you a good boy. And she said her grandson got serious and looked up at her and said, "It's not working, is it?" Sometimes when I feel like prayer just doesn't work, um, I know there are people who pray for God to heal their spouse or their son or their daughter. Um, and when that prayer doesn't seem to be answered in the way they would like it to be answered, they're ready to give up on God. I've heard people say, I'm there in church on Sunday and I tithe. What good does it do me if God's not going to answer this prayer in the way I want it to be? I think that's what Satan was expecting to hear from Job. And he does seem close at times when you look at his defense of himself throughout the book of Job. But fortunately, Elihu appears on the scene, someone to speak for God and give clarity in preparation for God stepping forward to speak, which he will tomorrow, as you'll see in our reading. But in chapter 34, verse 11, Elihu says, "The work of a man shall he render unto him." Job was close to saying that God is somehow indifferent to the works of men. In other words, there's no connection between what we do and God's blessing or God's punishment. It's all just arbitrary. But clearly, there is a connection, even though we may not see it or understand it. But one thing Job did need to understand, and we do too, is that life on this earth is just one small slice of eternity. And any understanding of life's cause and effect relationships has to include an eternal perspective. In verse 15, he said, "All flesh shall perish together." Well, Job was asking for justice in his arguments as he defends himself. It's a good thing he didn't get it, because if God operated on that principle, we would all get the justice we deserve with an eternity apart from him in hell. Another way of looking at it is to say that, the life everyone enjoys, from the worst sinner to the most devout saint, is all the result of grace. Every breath you take is grace. He also goes back to what Job has said in chapter 35, verse 3. "Thou saidst, What advantage will it be unto thee? And what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sin?" He's summarizing Job's many complaints with a slight exaggeration. Uh, Job was at least more spiritual than to bargain with God for some personal benefits in some way. But on the other hand, he may have expected God to bless him for his righteousness. And actually, God did, even though he didn't see it. You remember back at the beginning of the book of Job when Satan appeared and before God, and God said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Well, his response was, "You put a hedge around him. I can't get at this guy." I think that impenetrable hedge of protection around him was probably one of the biggest benefits that Job could receive, and he didn't even know it was there. But anyway, this change in attitude, it would have made his suffering more bitter, and it has to be changed. Elihu said in chapter 35, verse 6, "If thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? Or if thy transgressions be multiplied, what doest thou unto him?" In a typical business deal, Job would do something for someone else and receive some consideration in return. And I wonder if he thought maybe serving God works that way. Maybe Job thought that God would bless him for his faithfulness, and perhaps even thought that his goodness brought some benefit to God. And the opposite, which Elihu mentions here, is the implication that somehow man's sin harms God in some way. No, God is not enriched by our service. He's not diminished by our rebellion against him. But our problem, I think, sometimes is that we don't understand what it means for God to answer our requests. Give you an example. The Bible says in James 5:15, the prayer of faith shall save the sick. I don't believe in faith healing, but there have been times when I have prayed for someone's healing, and I've seen God answer in a way that must be described as miraculous. I've seen God do it. And yet it's also true that when my wife had cancer, I prayed for her healing every day for 4 years. And yet God's answer was that she would receive her healing in heaven. And it was definitely not what I was praying for. So did that mean the promise didn't work? The prayer of faith didn't save the sick? No, the promise did work. But the prayer of faith doesn't mean that we bend God's will to please us in some way. It means that we bring our requests before Him and simply trust Him to do what's best. And He always does when we approach Him on that basis. We'll give that some thought today. Maybe meditate on it a little bit. And stay in your reading. Tomorrow's reading is in Job chapter 38 to 40. And so dig in there. I'll look forward to being with you again then as well. Have a great day, my friends.